Hello, everybody. Welcome to Subtle Asian Book Club. We are a book club focused on amplifying Asian storytellers. I'm Alexandra, also known as Twirling Pages, and I'm here with my co-host, Tiffany, also known as Read by Tiffany, and we're super excited to talk about our April book of the month, which was Disorientation by Elaine Hsieh Chou. So Elaine, can you please introduce yourself and your books? And as a quick icebreaker, what was your favorite book so far this year?
Thank you so much, Alexandra and Tiffany, for having me, and thank you to everyone who's tuning in. So who am I? I'm a Taiwanese American writer. I'm from California. I've written short stories. I wrote a novel that we're going to talk about. And I'm getting into screenwriting. Maybe we'll chat about that later. But yeah, just a writer. And the favorite book I read this year. So I'm going to do a cop-out. I'm going to highlight 3 books I had the pleasure of blurbing, where you get to read it in advance and write about it. So the first one was Elaine Hsieh Central Places. That if you like disorientation, I think there are similar themes that you might be interested to check out. The second one is Sea Change by Gina Chung. That one came out, I believe, in March. I don't know if I should describe the books, or should I sort of talk about them a little?
Yeah, it's up to you.
Okay, well, Central Places, it's about a woman coming home with an Asian American woman coming home with her white boyfriend to meet her parents and sort of what happens afterwards and her having to confront her past. Sea Change is about a Korean American woman who is in a rough spot in her life. And she has this connection to this giant octopus, and different things happen in her life where she really has to, look inside herself and find how to go on. And Flex is a third one by Jinwoo Chong, which is a time traveling kind of. It's hard to describe because I feel like it's doing something so different. But I will say it involves time travel and it follows a Korean American protagonist. Yeah, those 3 books I had the pleasure of reading early, so check them out.
Yes, we definitely will.
Yeah, adding it to my TBR right now. And I also like how a lot of them, or like some of them, kind of aligned with disorientation, which we'll talk about. So I'm going to use that as an excuse to segue into our first question. First and foremost, congratulations on your debut novel. It quickly became a fan favorite, and many of us, including myself, loved reading it. Can you tell us more about your path into writing? What inspired you to write this story specifically, and how did you go about bringing it to life?
Yes. Okay. Let me start with my path into writing. It was a detour, and I think I'm all about life detours and really advocate for being able to give yourself second chances, third chances. So how I got back, I took creative writing as an undergrad. I loved it so much. Is this cheesy to say? Like, it made me feel alive in a lot of ways. And, but I thought it wasn't a real job, it wasn't like a career, and I didn't know how to sort of pursue it in a practical way. So I was like, well, that was fun. Time to get a career. So, my plan was to become an English professor. And there were detours to that, but I did do like a year of a master's in English, and then I did 2.5 years of a PhD. But things happen, some big life changes and just realizations. And I was like, I must leave academia immediately. And I was also living abroad, and I decided to come back to the US. And so I applied to NYU to study fiction, and through their MFA program. And that's how I really got back into it. So it was, I mean, before I applied, I was starting to write again. And I think leaving academia gave me this freedom to explore something I love so much, but that I had shelved. And, you must have heard like PhDs, they're so time consuming. You just feel guilty if you are doing anything for fun or not working on your dissertation. So that's how I got back into it. And I started the first chapter. I had written like a chapter and a half of disorientation by the time I went to NYU. And it was very different. That version was very different. But what inspired it, and this is, again, I feel like all my answers are convoluted. I never have a straight, simple answer because it was, my original conception of the novel was not what it is now. It was a much darker version where Ingrid is in her 50s. She's married. She's teaching. So she's an English professor. And the novel was really about sexual assault on campus. And it's two of her students get wrapped up in this sexual assault case. And then she kind of gets pulled into it and has to question herself and her relationship to sex and desire. But then, if you remember in 2015, the end of 2015, I can't believe time is, I feel so old when I...
Yeah.
Wait, what? 15. Do you remember Michael Derrick Hudson? He was a white poet who tried to publish this poem with Chinese mythology. It got rejected a handful of times. Totally normal, right? Like if you're a writer, rejection is completely part of the process. But anyways, he decided the problem was that he was a white man, not his poem or just that it hadn't found the right home yet, So his solution was to change his name to Tiffanys. And this is the name of a Chinese American woman he grew up with. So it's like literally the name of a real person. And he submitted the poem to an anthology, a poetry anthology exclusively for poets of color, to celebrate poets of color. So this was an anthology that was, like off limits to him, but not Tiffanys. So he submitted it, it got in, and then he just outed himself right away as if to say, gotcha, prove that the white man has it rough. And instead of, he didn't prove that he's a bad person. When this happened in 2015, I was like, I must write about it. I mean, it infuriated me and it fascinated me. This was also the year that Rachel Dolezal had been outed, and I was really fascinated by her and her refusal to admit that she's white. And as far as I know to this day, those words have never come out of her mouth. So that character, that type of person fascinated me so much. The novel shifted and I was like, well, okay, if I want to write about this, how do I do it? I know Ingrid is she's in academia. Okay, so she would be researching someone. She could research this poet that I made up named Xiao Chou. And that's the answer. Everything came together in the end.
Wow. So I actually didn't know about this story before I read your book. And as we were preparing for this interview and kind of diving more into like some research, we saw that this happened and we were like, kind of, I wouldn't say surprised because I'm like, oh, okay, of course this happened. But it really just opened up a whole can of worms that I'm glad that your book dove into.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad I'm keeping it alive, not letting this guy still get off scot-free. I mean, I remember a few years ago, there was an article that was literally like, what happened to Michael Derrick Hudson? Because he's kind of disappeared after all this came out. But if people are interested, definitely check out Jenny Zhang's essay, They Pretend to Be Us While Pretending We Don't Exist. It's like a canonical essay. If you want to read more about it and what, just why it's so egregious. But yeah, I'm glad I can spread the anti Michael Derrick Hudson gospel.
That's so interesting because I think Alexandra and I both started off in the book community as book bloggers. And as we were growing up, we saw a lot of non-Asian writers write Asian stories, like Asian fantasy or Asian inspired, like Japanese mythology types of books, but never something like this. And so this is kind of like, wow, I can't believe this happened, but wow, I can believe it happened.
Yeah.
So you spoke a little bit about your background in academia and how it influenced the book. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experiences, like as a PhD student and researcher, and how that really influenced the world of disorientation, how the academic life is really like, and a lot of the Ingrid struggles and like all the other kids' struggles too. I wouldn't say kids, but.
I mean, I'm always very thankful when PhD students or just people who are in academia tell me that it felt realistic. And, you know, because even though I did do 2.5 years of a PhD, I was in France, and the system is very different. I never went through those first 3 years in the US where you have like intense coursework, and then you have these comprehensive exams, I believe they're called. A lot of this I had to research online, and I had to ask friends who've been through it in the US, because in France that you just start writing your dissertation right away, and you're just kind of left to your own devices, you know, you're just, yeah. So I think what I try to channel that I had experienced was this moment where Ingrid just feels sort of the weight of, you know, the usefulness, like what is she doing, spending her life, you know, researching this, as far as she knows, dead old Asian man, she calls him. And I had this moment where, you know, I'd be like researching, and like the big library in Paris, the BNF, it's terrifying, like dungeon. No, it's very beautiful in some ways, but like at least for most of the research and everything, it's down several elevators, so you don't see the sun. Or maybe they did change it so there's like a garden, but you know, you're just mostly in the dark in the room. And I was reading so intimately about these, well, they were all white women, like from the 1920s and 30s, and I realized it was such an act of love. And you know, here I was like reading through their letters, their diary entries, and to give that amount of your time and energy to someone is an act of love. And I started to have this weird thought about, would they love me back? Like if they had known me. And I know that's not a logical question. It is purely an emotional kind of response to, I think, other things I was thinking through. And just generally wondering, like, is this what I want to devote my life to? You know, there would be times I was at academic conferences where like someone's entire like life's work was around the use of like Virginia Woolf and semicolons. And I was like, bro, like people are starving. Not that, you know, and what am I saying now? It's not like I like gave up everything and then went to go work at like a food bank, but I'm saying there was this weird discrepancy, right? Where we'd be in this beautiful like 17th century forum, like building, discussing these things, and like James Joyce's eyeglass prescriptions. And then like outside in Paris, there were all these protests and people literally setting trash cans on fire. And I would just have these really surreal out of body moments of like, what am I doing with my life? I should be out there. Fuck it, I'm going out there. And I quit, and it was great. And I got to then devote a lot more of my time to organizing and activism. But yeah, so that was the part that I knew, and that grueling feeling of, you know, staring at the blank page and writing. So I try to channel that. The other stuff, I admit, I really had to sort of just come up with and research.
No, I feel like I definitely got that when I was reading the book, especially since like I'm a student right now, and as you were describing like the whole how like academia is very much a bubble, I was like, I feel this so much, where it almost feels like so purposeless to just like stare at this paper and then have to like write, I don't know, like 10 plus pages on like something that seems like so unimportant in the grand scheme of things, because when you look outside, there's like people dying and like all this horrible stuff happening. So I definitely got that through Disorientation.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad that I could channel those feelings and that, you know what they are.
Yeah. But the book, like Disorientation, is like full of humor, satire, and biting wit along with the academia trauma, but it also touches on other serious issues like racism, misogyny, and cultural appropriation. How did you balance the different tones of the book?
Man, I wish there was like a clear cut almost structure or formula that I could relay to other people or writers, but I had to wing it. I just had to follow my instincts. And I think humor, like I was at a panel and someone asked, like they're trying to write comedic book or something like that. And they just asked, how do you know if something's funny? And I was on a panelist with other people who've all written, so-called funny novels. And it was like, you just know or you don't. And I mean, not that humor's universal. You really hope that someone will get your sense of humor, right? And sometimes people will tell me like, oh, I thought this part was so funny. And I was like, oh, I didn't even mean that part to be funny. And then the part that I think is really funny, or like a certain part, like I have no idea if other people do. So I think when it comes strictly to humor, you are just, humor literally is a bodily reflex. It's something so uncontrollable. And so it is very hard to sort of, take it apart in retrospect and figure out, how did that come about? Or so in terms of humor, just flying by the seat of my pants, trying to follow my instincts, what I thought was funny, and then hoping other people would find it funny too. And then with the seriousness, that I think was just listening to the story and realizing, I think all books have hills and valleys, right? And so we have to go down to those valleys. And during those times, I think in those moments in the book, it just felt right and made sense for the humor to step aside for a second. Although I think tragedy and comedy are bedfellows, they live side by side. I think like Parasite, the film, is such a great example of when something is so tragic, it literally just becomes comic. That entire movie, I think, is so funny, and the entire movie is so tragic. There's nothing that should be inherently funny about like a secret basement where this man has been kept alive, and yet, hilarious. I'm just cracking up from how horrible and sort of it is. So I think there's something about that too, that it's not always separate. I think a lot of times the most tragic things are the funniest, and vice versa. So yeah, I think that's how I try to navigate it. I have no idea if I succeeded, I think.
No, you definitely did. Yeah. I feel like you balanced the topics really well. At times I was like, oh, I feel like this, I don't know what this feeling is in my chest, but it's kind of like the same feeling you get when you watch a movie like Parasite. You're like, oh my God, what's going on?
Yeah, you're like, I'm uncomfortable, but you don't mind.
Yeah, but it's like a good kind. You're like talking about important stuff. But moving on to the next question. Have you ever felt that your experiences and stories as an Asian American writer, because we're still an Asian book club, were overlooked or dismissed by the publishing industry or readers because they didn't fit into a certain narrative or a stereotype? Especially like as you go through your publishing journey, do you feel like you've ever had any pressure or expectations to conform to something that just didn't feel like you?
Yeah. This is a great question. So for Disorientation, I was able to write about whatever I want. I mean, the book, when we sent it out, like my agents, it got passes, and I never found out why those passes happened. But within the first round, we got passes, and we got some people who were interested, and I was lucky that when it came to the actual content of the book, you know, the things about Ingrid's Taiwanese American identity and, I guess, for lack of a better word, just Asian stuff that happens in the book. I'm explaining it terribly, but, you know, that no one was like telling me, giving me input on that. It was really just me. And, you know, I would ask, this was before we sent it out, but, you know, I had like a lot of beta readers, including a lot of my friends, most of who are Asian. And we would have these conversations, but, you know, by the time the book got like accepted and sold, I didn't get any pushback because it was just the person, you know, Penguin Press, who bought it was like, yeah, let's do it. And I was like, cool. No one was like, what is this word weeaboo? You know, it's just like, leave it in there. It was, yeah, no one, I truly did not get pushback for those types of things. And then before then, I'd really only been publishing short stories. And it's really hard to know because you don't know, you know, editors typically don't give you any feedback about why they passed on something. And a lot of what I was publishing centered Asian American characters. And so when it gets accepted again, it's like, great, but, you know, a lot of stuff gets rejected and you don't know why. But if I had to guess, and I really, you know, I'm just reaching here, but for example, I had this piece that was about, it was a manual for a Japanese sex doll called Hiriko. Maybe go into it, but it was this manual where it was supposed to be comedic, but it's also sort of horrifying because like there's like a user questionnaire where like users were asking questions like, well, do I get a refund if I burned parts of her? And how do I get, but then it was also kind of sad because they're like, well, can she really love me? But there were all these like parts in it where it really is about how Asian women are hypersexualized, right? So how we are already treated like objects and sex dolls. So that was really what it was about. And it got turned out everywhere. To this day, you know, it's never been published. But the people who read it, and when I've read it like aloud when I was studying at NYU, I mean, the response was great. I think so. Maybe, you know, I don't know. That was just me conjecturing, like, is every editor who's reading this just, you know, they don't get it, or I don't know. Again, I don't know what I'm saying, because I think patients, having now been on the other end of reading people's work and getting to have that position of power where I decide what I think is publishable or not, it's so subjective. So I could just be talking out of, you know, my ass, and but that just came to mind as maybe when someone didn't really get it. But I do think overall, very generally speaking, there are still some stories, immigrant stories or Asian American stories or what have you, that are that don't push sort of our conceptions of Asian America, you know, and they're not really making people uncomfortable in a certain way. So I don't know. I don't know anything. I feel like I'm just sitting here, like the weight of that I need to say something accurate and historic. I'm just like,
no.
Disclaimer, this is just random opinions on this day.
No, I think what we love about the book is like how authentic it feels. And I think for me, this was one of the first books I read as like a Taiwan, like, because I'm also Taiwanese American, that just made me feel so seen and just not having to like shy away from that piece of your identity and being like, oh yeah, like I'm Asian American, like I like you, like being very proud of who you are. So I really appreciate the book for what that is. But yeah.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, also I feel like the short story that you were describing kind of like, I know it's not the same per se as the book that Steven is translating, like obviously not, but then I feel like some themes of it are like potentially like peppered into disorientation, which I find like very interesting because like there is like the topic of like hypersexualization of Asian women and like all that other stuff, but we'll go into that deeper. But on the topic of Asian women, we wanted to ask, in the novel, Ingrid forms close relationships with other Asian women, each of whom bring something different into her life. And I think of Eunice in particular. How have friendships with other Asian women in your own life impacted your writing and like your life in general?
I mean, they've, in every single way possible, they're Asian women and well, not just women, but I guess also non-binary people and trans people. They just like they're my whole life, and so yeah, if you, I guess, look through my sort of close friends list or like who I'm texting, it's just mostly Asian women, and so it's hard to say like how they influence the book because they're so inextricable from who I am and me just as a person separate from being a writer. But specifically for disorientation, just knowing that Asian woman, because not only am I one, but having so many of these relationships in my life, I just know that we're very different. And especially, I guess, on a political spectrum, right? And also, I just wasn't really seeing that. And I think what was so important for me to put on the page with Disorientation was to show how, you have like Ingrid and Eunice, who are both much more like not very politically active or, but identify as generally liberal, right? And what's interesting is they both have very different backgrounds. So like Eunice grew up in like the San Gabriel Valley and didn't ever feel like she, didn't have representation. And then Ingrid grew up in like a very white suburban part of Massachusetts. And, but they both sort of end up with similar politics. And then, Vivian is like a radical leftist activist. And I just wanted to show them the ways that they clash, but also the ways they come together. I wanted to show that they're all, just like all humans, messy. And it was just fun to explore like different ways you can be. And it felt important to me to have like a breadth of characters. And Eunice as like a Asian baby girl. I'm like, hey, we need more AP representation in literature. I don't really know if I see it that often, but and for someone like Vivian, I feel like we also don't see that often. So it was just, really important to me to show kind of like the breadth of the people I know. Not that I only know these two types of people, but as like a very small, even, sample of the ways you can just be a person and then they happen to also be Asian.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I feel like when you, like, now that you've said it, I haven't really seen a lot of like the type of Vivians or the type of Eunices out there in the media world. But I feel like looking back at my life as a person, there have been times where I've acted like Vivian or times when I've acted like Eunice or definitely acted like Ingrid. So even just being different people, they all reflect who we are, I guess, sometimes too.
I love that. I mean, I've seen people ask like, which were you an Ingrid, Vivian, or Vivian? And someone replied, I'm an Ingrid sun, Eunice moon, Vivian rising, something like that. And I was like, this is just all more than I could have ever dreamed of. I mean, what a joy and honor for anyone to see the characters as so real and full.
So now we're going to segue a little bit into some plot and character questions. And starting off, Ingrid's relationship with her fiance, Steven, is, of course, a central part in the book. How did you approach depicting their relationship, particularly in relation to Ingrid's identity and self-discovery? And do you have anything you hope for readers to take away from this storyline, especially considering like yellow fetish, like all those types of things, and racism against Asian Americans still play a big role in society today?
Yes. This is, I'm glad we're digging into this. So I think, the obvious disclaimer, and it's like something that shouldn't even need to be spelled out, but it's, of course, not every relationship between an Asian woman and a white man is like Ingrid and Steven's relationship. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's like a sort of blanket, absurd statement. One couldn't even, like, how would you calculate that? By like surveying every single one, you know what I mean? So that being said, right? So that's the disclaimer. That being said, I think so many Asian women have had a horrible relationship, especially if you grow up in like a mostly white area with a white man fetishizing. And it was such, like, I think for me and my Asian girlfriends, it's like a life-defining thing. I mean, it fucks you up so deeply. It calls into question like so many things, right? And I think it's very hard to recover from. And I wasn't seeing it anywhere, right? So like you mentioned these books, you've seen like a lot of books about Asia written by non-Asian people. I also had seen this relationship between Asian women and white men depicted for so long. I mean, it literally is sort of the conception of like the first real Asian woman literary character was Cho Cho San, like in Madame Butterfly. It's like the oldest, almost, at least in the West, this depiction of us. So from there on out, we're like screwed, right? That's like a terrible first representation. Because Cho Cho San values her own life so little that when this like random colonizer is like, well, I'm going back to America to like a white lady, she's like, well, I'm going to stab myself in the stomach now and abandon my like Asian child. And I'm like, what? What Asian woman would do that? Like, please don't give yourself so much credit. Like, you're a dude, and anyway, so there are all these relationships that have been depicted on screen and in books, but none of them depicted the particular toxic nature of someone like Steven, right? Who I'm always very happy when people tell me that they hate him the most and that they think, because none of the white men come out looking good. And I'm like, the fact that like Steven, you hate even more than John Smith, I'm pretty proud could accomplish that. Because the thing about Steven is he thinks he's the main character. He thinks he's the good guy, the recycling, like wanting to donate to African villages good guy, right? So that's what makes him so infuriating. Whereas I feel Michael and John are like, yeah, we know we're not good. Like deep, you know what I mean? If confronted with that, I don't think they'd be like, oh, how dare you accuse me? They'd be like, yeah, like pretty loose on the moral scale. Whereas Steven is just like, would be like, have a meltdown, right? Like, how dare you accuse me? Do you know how much I donate every year? And so anyways, it was so important for me to just seize this in a book. And it was like, if I can't find it, I guess I got to write it because how else am I going to not feel gaslit? That you can have 100 books where, right, this Asian woman apparently, right, just wants to like sacrifice herself for this white colonizer. And then, but none where that guy who's obsessed with Asia and, travels to Asia to like get an Asian wife and he's always the hero. But where was the version where he sucks and where he's lame and where he's, in this case, an emotionally abusive partner? So I just needed to write about it to not feel like I was losing my mind, and in a way to validate so many experiences of the people in my life, And I should say, this obviously goes beyond gender. Like in the queer community, there's a whole lot of talk, right, about like, quote, rice chasers and it exists. Let me just say that, right? Not to get into a whole other topic, but I should say that too. K-pop, what Asian guys are telling me is that like they are now being fetishized, and having to maybe reckon with like, well, is this what you really wanted? Don't you just want to be a person? So yeah, long answer to say all these sort of reasons why I needed to write about a relationship like Steven and Ingrid's, even though obviously, you know, I'm not trying to like make a blanket 100% all, because I have so many friends who are mixed, and I don't, you know, I would never want any of my mixed friends to feel like just because they have a white dad and an Asian mother that they are like not supposed to exist or something. That is such dangerous, you know, what is it? What is that word? Misogyn, you know, it would promote miscegenation.
Misogyny?
No, it's the mixing of, it's the official term for mixing of races. So like the US had all these anti-miscegenation laws until the 60s. So actually we weren't, like, Asians marrying outside of their race was not legal until I think after 1967, and it was partially because of the civil rights movement, what the Black community was fighting for. I think it's like the Loving case, but even after that, I know for Asians specifically, it was pretty late. 1967 is pretty late.
No, it is. Like I think about, so much to discuss, so much to dig into. No, it is so interesting. I have like a couple thoughts in my head, and I'll see if I can remember all of them. When you were talking about how like Steven is like one of the most hated characters, I totally felt that. But also it was super interesting for me because like when I first started, I remember like the first half of the book. It's interesting because like the book is told from Ingrid's perspective, and so it's like you see Steven like from like her like almost like loving, she did love him in the beginning, and she was like, oh, like he's great, and I was like, this is like interesting, like I wonder where it'll go, like maybe it will end up being like, oh yeah, like even though she has a white boyfriend, like he's not toxic, and like these different relationships, like different interracial relationships could work or something, and then it did like a whole different like U-turn.
Like burn it all down, chaos.
But it comes out so well because there's like little pieces where I'm like, side eye.
Yeah,
and then
me too.
When she starts to realize that he's emotionally abusing her, I was like, yes.
I know, so many people. I mean, Ingrid is purposefully frustrating, you know, because she's someone who you see make the wrong choice consistently, or just not even like the right, it's just like she talks herself out of it. She gaslights herself constantly. To be like, oh, I'm sure this isn't it, and I'm sure, because I think that's so real for a lot of us, especially I think Asian women who are not told or taught to like stand in their truth and advocate for themselves. And so for her, like she had been really conditioned to question any of her like gut instincts, right? And so someone like Steven, I think, definitely could sense that about her. And emotionally abusive people are very careful about the targets they pick, and I think he sensed that she didn't have a strong sense of self, right?
Yeah, for sure. I remember when I first started reading it, I did not love Ingrid right away, and I think it was in part because I saw like parts of my flaws in her flaws, but I really loved her like character growth in the end, and like we'll talk about the ending later. But yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. That's really great to hear.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of white men, another central plot line in the story is that white men in positions of power dictate the narrative and how history is retold. Specifically, Michael and John Smith are the prime examples. Although their ending, like both of their endings are realistic, Ingrid doesn't really get a happy ending, and it almost feels like we're left hopeless for her cause. Why did you decide to end the story this way, especially with John committing blackface in the end?
Yeah, I was like, I think when I was writing the novel, and the novel is set in like 2016, 2017. And when I was writing it, it was really through those years, right? Like from like very, very early conception in 2015 to finishing it more or less in like 2019. If you looked at what was happening in our world, there was never justice. There was never any accountability through those years. Like our literal president of the United States, so many counts of like illegal behavior and this is the end, you know, the police and so many powerful institutions where the facts were as plain as day, right? You shot someone holding like a cell phone, you clearly have cheated people through like this university or housing or taxes. Just we lived in this absurdist time that has not ended. I will say, you know, whenever there's like a Democratic president, everyone's sort of the blinders come on, and I get it because it's a coping mechanism, right? Because 4 years of Trump was like, I think everyone was so stressed out. You know, you were just like your body was like in a fight or flight response for 4 years. I think that's how stressful it was. And I think that's why a lot of people after he left was like, I need to almost delude myself and pretend that things are okay now. But all that to say, for those years, I couldn't even imagine a world where Michael and John would have accountability. It was inconceivable it was like my hands wouldn't even let me like type out that version because it was like, well, now this is just going to be like science fiction. Like if I write that, this is no longer like just satire. This is no longer, if it even is that, but you know, I would just be bringing it into like a truly make-believe world. And I couldn't do that. I think all I could do for Ingrid was imagine what freedom looked like for her. You know, as small as it was, freedom is dumping Steven. So that's like a huge win. And living with her parents again, I mean, I think a lot of people, we think it as like a regression, right? And maybe the opposite of freedom. But I think after Ingrid's circumstances where she was also so isolated and she was going through so much, but she felt she couldn't open up to her parents. So to me, it felt like freedom for her to be able to just be close with them and learn to get to know them. And even though Eunice leaves her and goes to South Korea, I think it was good for both of them because I could see the two of them becoming too codependent, you know, where it would start to be unhealthy, where Ingrid could maybe never make a single decision on her own. So it's like I think she does kind of need to be alone and need to like learn how to make new friends on her own. So, but regardless, yeah, like a reader once told me it wasn't until the epilogue where they stopped feeling incredibly stressed out for Ingrid. Like they were just stressed out for her for like, 390 pages. And then it was and I was like, okay, if that's like, I know there's no real justice here. And Michael was basically fucking like promoted, you know, in a way. Of course he was like, what else would he be but promoted? And then John Smith goes back to his like ridiculous racial cosplaying schemes because he's just a troll. Like I think the thing about John is you don't know why he does anything because he is just one of those people who just wants to, you know, screw with you, and that's what he gets off on is you not being able to pin him down. But anyways, I was like, you know, they're doing that, but at least all I can give Ingrid is this sort of break, right? Like no more dissertation, no more Steven, and she can just chill for a bit and right, just hang out with her parents, and they go like bowling and stuff. So I'm like, just let her bowl for a while and watch the geese at the park.
She deserves it.
Yeah,
Right.
seriously. Yeah, honestly, I really like the ending, even though like it sucks. Technically, like if you look at it on the surface level, it's like it's a very unfortunate turn of events because it's like, oh, like the bad guys win and like she never ends up getting her PhD, et cetera, et cetera. But then like at the same time, like whoever that reader was, like, yes, I am the same. Where like when I finally read the epilogue, I was like, even though like on surface level it seems like she had a sad ending, it wasn't really sad in actuality because she got to like really be free and to like kind of like take time to really like think about what she wants to do and like have like find herself and like have that type of space. And like she didn't have that for almost like her whole life. And I love that like she moved back home, because I feel like, I don't know if this is just like a stigma within the Asian community, but like also maybe just like being in your 20s or 30s or however old, but like moving back home does feel like a regression, is like a great way to describe it. But then like the way that you portrayed it in Disorientation was like really almost inspiring, because now I'm like, oh, like moving back home is not always a bad thing, even though like I feel like socially it seems like it is, but it's not.
Yeah. I felt like she was go for so long, and now she can just finally be who she is. And especially going back home, you get to finally reconcile and like spend that quality time with your family too.
Like I felt like, her parents were not mad about it at all. They were not like, you're 30 years old and moving back home. They were like, oh, yay, let us like cut fruit for you and like bring it to your, this is all brings us so much joy. So I think it was very like sweet for all three of them. But this is one of my favorite questions to ask people. So I'd love to ask you guys, what do you hope happens to Ingrid after we leave her at the end of the novel? What is like your sort of dream for her?
That's so hard.
Okay. Tiffany, do you have an answer, or
stop? I know you're trying to make me go first.
I can go first. I can go first.
You're like, do you want to go first? No, I'm still thinking.
Okay, I can go first. I don't know. I feel like sometimes
that's the fun.
I feel like oh, okay, I have a question for you after this, but I feel like at some point in the book she does like talk about wanting to be a professor, but I don't know if like that's like attached to her idea of like, oh, like I should be because of academia or something along those lines. But I don't know. I think I would give her like 5 years to relax and kind of like rediscover herself, and like who she is at the end of the book and who she will be in like 5 years is like completely different. So it's like at that point it's like Russian roulette. You will never know. Like maybe she'll be like, oh, I'm gonna move to Taiwan, or like I'm gonna do XYZ. And like I feel like the fun part is that like you never know, because people change so much in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So true. And I love the 5 years. Yeah. Let her just 5 years and just chill, because she's been through a lot. I think she has to recover.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Tiffany.
This is so hard. I feel like I still envision her just something still with education, maybe not at the college level, but like maybe within high schools, or just helping other like young Asian people, or just like not even Asian, just like young people figure out the journey that she kind of had condensed into this one book. Because I think it's a lot that she had to mentally work through herself. And if she is, I feel like I'm envisioning her like giving back in that way, and seeing someone who is like a mini Ingrid just like going through these struggles, like maybe someone in college who's like complaining about her roommate who's like a Vivian, and then helping her like navigate all these types of things.
So like a counselor, she could be like
like a guidance counselor.
Guidance counselor. Oh, I could totally see that. It's a really sweet new one. I've heard, well, to add to it, I've heard like some that I remember are Eunice and Ingrid start a true crime podcast.
Yes.
Ingrid becomes a private eye. And I was like, and these are things that I could never have conceived of by myself. That's what's so incredible, is like the characters truly stand on their own legs, and then and people can sort of imagine them just doing these. And I was like, right, because she loves to snoop. She is just a little snooper. And so she would want to get, and I feel like she'd be like a really kind of like, she wouldn't be like a suave PI. She would still be very clumsy, you know? I think that would be hilarious to just imagine her trying to open up an office and sort of just being very clumsy.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you for entertaining my little question.
We love it.
Wait, okay, I had a question for you.
Yes.
In regards to like this kind of topic. Do you think you would ever like write a sequel about what happens to Ingrid, like after the epilogue?
No, I think Ingrid's journey as we meet her, as far as like me writing it, has ended. But I will say with the film adaptation, so that's sort of very early stages of development, but it's not in any way a sequel, but you know, things are changing, obviously, and so it is fun within that space that I sort of feel like I'm writing it. I think maybe that's why I don't feel a compulsion to write like a book sequel, because with a film adaptation, we have this possibility to change some things and dramatize certain things. And I can't go into detail because, you know, nothing's set in stone yet, but I think that's why I'm like, oh, I am still in my head. It's still so ongoing. It's still like talking about what Ingrid would do in here and what Eunice will do and Alex will do, because I'm now with the film, they're still like alive, and I'm still getting to like make these choices for them.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. I know it's probably going to be like a long way before we actually get it, but I'm so excited.
Oh,
no, me
thank
too,
you. I
me
really
too.
hope I will take that manifesting energy, because, you know, like I said, very early stages, but I really hope it can eventually be made. Thank you.
So we have like another longer question before we dive into some quick speed round questions. And I'm so sorry. I know we're taking up a lot of your time, but we're very grateful and we love talking to you. But in recent years, Asian American voices surrounding politics has become more vocal all across the spectrum. So as we were coming up with this question, we were thinking of Timothy, who's an Asian conservative, who's a little bit more far right on campus with his ideology. So why was it important for you to show a character on such the extreme end, as opposed to maybe the formerly popular stereotype that Asians just don't get involved in politics, or we're very neutral?
Yeah. So speaking of, you know, I was talking about before with what America was going through in those years, I was seeing the Asian American community become even more, I guess, vocal, but also divided in terms of, well, we were just winning elections on both sides now, like local, or, you know, like congressional, or like local Senate elections, where some of the most successful Asian American politicians are on the right.
Yeah.
And it was like, why aren't we talking about this? Because I think in a lot of books that I'd seen, or even in media, we are just not portrayed as a politicized community. And I was like, but we totally are. I mean, that is like any community. I mean, yeah, we like, some might be apathetic or just, you know, no, they don't have strong opinions, but regardless, we're still there. And I still remember like one of the most like fervent Trump campaigners was this young Chinese American woman. I don't know. I think, was she like 8? She was in college. She was young. Oh. And was like campaigning hard for him, and this shouldn't be as, I mean, because it's every ethnicity has campaigned for him. But it was like, but why are we presented as a sort of monolith, as in we all kind of agree with each other on everything. And, you know, there was so much representation of the ways that like an Asian community, especially families, are different people with like very different personalities. But politics would just sort of like be left out of it, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm like, to me, that informs a lot of how you move through the world. And it was like, I want to talk about it. And I think writing Timothy, it was also a little of my personal ire for figures like him. And, you know, I'm trying to be less, what's the word? Because I think what I realized is like at a certain moment when I would just really could not even tolerate like hearing certain opinions on the right, I would like in like a Facebook group for Asian people, I would be like, ban this person. Like I would get so upset at what they were saying. And a lot of this was actually around the Peter Liang, Akai Gurley shooting. So this was when a Chinese American police officer killed a Black man. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that sparked like a huge discussion and a lot of tension in our community. And I think revealed a lot of things we weren't talking about. But it was around that time. And anyways, I would get so upset if anyone tried to defend Peter, was like, tell the moderators to ban this person. But then I started to realize like, oh, what if this person that I'm like yelling at is now going to join like an alt-right group and feel, well, at least they accept me. At least I'm not being, you know, yelled at. And I was like, oh, wait, that's not good either. I mean, I think a really eye-opening experience for me was like, I went to this protest because they really needed sort of like anti-NYPD protesters. And we were sort of like shipped out there in a way because it was important to show. Anyways, it was a pro NYPD protest in Flushing, New York, that was like 100%, basically like 99.9% older Asian immigrants who were supporting the police, and they were wearing like MAGA t-shirts and wearing like eagle flag shirts, and it was like I heart NYPD. And so then they were there, and then there was a small group of us who were inevitably like younger and second or third gen or whatever, and we were like, we hate the NYPD. Asians don't like the NYPD. And it was because I think we were all very aware of how news channels would like glob onto this, and they would show the protesters from Flushing and say like, see, Asian Americans love cops. Okay, they are just good model minority, whatever, blah 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 blah. And we were there to be like, you gotta keep us in the shop. But that day ended up being so interesting and incredible because the older Asian immigrants were really mad at us, and they were like yelling at us and be like, why are you saying this? And but some people who were bilingual ended up having conversations with them. And of course, and this should be no surprise to anyone, these older immigrants were just scared. They're scared of their livelihoods. They're scared for everything they've worked for and built, and they're just terrified. And they aren't, you know, there's just not the same vocabulary around like how cops and that whole system works in the US. Mm-hmm. But I think it was a great moment for me to see, like, you're not going to change anyone's mind by like screaming at them and telling them to like ban this person, right? Yeah. But I think some of those older immigrants could see where we were coming from when we try to broke down, you know, we're building a future for all of us, not just Asian Americans, but Black Americans and Latinx Americans, and looking, you know, just trying to explain these things where they were like, oh, I didn't even know, like, I hadn't thought of that, you know? Mm-hmm. And it was through conversation. So sorry, I went on a long tangent there. But with Timothy's character, it's like, yeah, so I'm trying to show that I did have a lot of anger towards Asian Americans, where I was just like, what are you doing fighting for this side that will throw you under the bus the second they can? And honestly, with like the whole COVID, just xenophobia nonsense and the goddamn like Chinese spy balloon, like you were seeing that, like, of course they'll turn on you. That, our country was founded on like xenophobic, like so many of the laws are built on this. And so, but anyways, to say that now I'm trying to be at least more understand that the way to go about it is to have a conversation and maybe not just shut the door in someone's face. So maybe in another, in like a later version of, if there was a later version of Disorientation, like Ingrid would actually try to talk to Timothy, but I try to give him that moment where she looks at him and she sort of recognizes herself in him, right? And it's like,
yeah, I was literally just going to point that out because like I feel like you did such a good job with Timothy as a character, and he was so interesting because of all the things that you just said earlier, how like I saw like some people in my personal like Asian community who like became like very far politically on each extreme, and it was like really interesting to see that in Timothy's character. But then what like really stood out, or like one moment that like stood out in Disorientation specifically, was like when Ingrid was like thinking about like this affirmative action thing that like she was like, oh, like I remember like Timothy was like the one who like started this affirmative action, like anti-affirmative action protest in the campus, and then she was like, wait, I signed it.
Oh my God. Yeah, that moment of horror where she's like, I love it because she's sort of on her high horse, like, how dare he? And then she's like, wait, did I sign that? Oh, this is my cat.
Hi.
Don't mind him.
No, we love it.
But thank you for asking about this. I'm glad we're talking about it because we just. I still feel like we do need to talk about, right, that just so we can also hopefully move towards a stronger sense of community,
Yeah. I love that you mentioned just like all of that, because I think when you're younger, you might think like from the perspective of maybe a Vivian, you're just like, that person is just straight wrong. But then as you open up to more conversations, you're like starting to see where some people are coming from, especially like elderly Asians, like the fear that they have, a lot of the backgrounds of why they immigrated to the US may influence a lot of their current thinking. And all of that put together just will create, well, first of all, there's just so many Asians in the US. So obviously there's going to be all across the spectrum of beliefs and ideas. So you can't really just bucket anyone into a specific group or category. Like everyone's going to be different, and their own experiences will like influence their thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course. And understanding, that Asian countries also have a history with each other, and the difference with immigration waves, and like why certain countries, they even, it's, all of that nuance, I hope we can see more of.
Okay. So now thank you for entertaining all of these amazing questions and like all the thoughts we had, because we love this book, but we wanted to dive into some more fun and like hopefully speedy questions.
Okay. Speed round.
Stan, do you want to kick it off?
Yes. Okay. First question is, what is your most anticipated 2023 release?
2023. This year?
Yes.
Oh, that I haven't talked about yet. That's coming out. Oh God. Oh wait, I should have prepared for this. My mind is blanking. Let me see if I can come back to it if I remember.
Okay. Sounds good. I'll ask the next one. I'll ask all the speed questions. Okay. This is also a bit hard. What is a book that you would recommend to everyone?
Ooh.
Sorry.
Right. That recommend to everyone. I guess just because it's like my favorite, or one of my favorites, or that I think everyone would sort of like it. It's also hard for me to narrow down a favorite one. how about this? Can I answer the books that I thought are in conversation with disorientation, that if you're interested, to check them out. So Don Lee, Yellow, that short story collection was really the first one I read where I just saw Asian Americans like existing. It's weird to say, but it's almost like, you know, how everyone's talking about beef, how it's like sort of, honestly, like I think the first time on TV anyways, we're seeing Asian Americans just be able to like be themselves, and there's not like a sort of commentary. I feel Yellow was doing that, and that was in the 90s. And Don Lee's The Collective is actually set on a campus and features these 3 Asian American friends. And I read that after I finished Disorientation, because I was like, oh no, what if I've like accidentally in my head, you know, copied this book? And but then afterwards, when I read it, you know, there's definitely similarities and differences. But if you like Disorientation, definitely check out The Collective. Jenny Zhang's Sour Heart, just being Asian, again, just being able to be so messy and flawed and real. And it's funny how it's like, oh, of course we can do that, but sometimes you kind of need to see it on the page first and be like, oh yeah. Marilyn Chin's Revenge of the Mooncake Vixen, such a fun little book that's like really experimental and playful, and there's these 2 twins, and there are like some magical realist moments, but the 2 twin girls, they're like, again, horny and bad. They just get to be horny and bad. So, you know, I think all just important for us to see that, yeah, like Asian women aren't, you know, what we've been typecast into, and those books really opened up the door for me to be like, oh yeah, I can have them be as messy and flawed and annoying as I want.
Yes, we will check all of those out.
Yes, for sure. Okay, last speedrun question. What is your favorite Asian food / favorite food in general?
Okay. Again, so hard.
Sorry.
But I will say, like, yeah, I'm just gonna represent Taiwan in this moment and say, you know, like the classic like beef noodle soup, can't go wrong with. I mean, it's always so comforting and good. And like the what is it? What is that? What is the actual name called? But like the minced, you know, pork. Sometimes rice. Yeah. Egg and that dish. Yeah, I will say, I just like Taiwanese comfort food. 3-cup chicken is like another one that I make pretty often because it's not too hard to make. The favorite food of all time, I mean, yeah, that's hard because I think it always depends on my mood. But I think like a lot of Americans, but maybe just people, throughout my life, I'm like, oh yeah, the food that I've probably have eaten like so often is pizza. Something, yeah. So not very interesting, but if I'm trying to think of just like, oh, what's like a food that I've eaten my entire life, several times, like often in a year, consistently, oh, I guess it's a total cliche, pizza.
Honestly, I could live off of pizza and minced pork rice and beef noodle soup. So that's all a good combo. Maybe some veggie sauce in some other areas.
Right. I'm like, I have not mentioned any vegetable.
But thank you so much for entertaining our fun little speed round. We wanted to close things off by asking, is there anything else that you're working on right now? Anything that fans of yours can expect?
Yeah, so I'm working on the short story collection that was bought at the same time as the novel, but I just have to, you know, revise it, and there are a couple new things I'm adding to it. But that collection, I'm really excited for people to read because it's like a lot of what I write is speculative. So there's like what I call a soft sci-fi story involving a virtual reality and massage parlor in Asia. There's a story about a mail order bride who arrives in the mail. A story about, well, a character kind of similar to Timothy who thinks he's joined a softball team, but it might be the KKK. Just fun stuff. You know, I love to just let my mind be a little wacky. And so I'm excited to share, just because I think disorientation is such a specific voice and tone and a specific world, which is set in academia. But I generally, you know, don't write in that world. So I get to share, I think, all the other things that I'm interested in and obsessed with. Yeah, and I wanted to share that I am teaching, if there are any writers listening, I'm teaching, yes, a writing class with Tin House. They're great. I did their summer workshop a few years ago with Alexandra Chih. You have to shout out one of the most incredible, generous souls and just writing teachers, and just incredible person. But anyways, yeah, so it's about writing, if you're writing like a novel or a short story, what screenwriting and TV and movies can teach us about, and how it's helped me. I think as I learn more about screenwriting and I write more scripts, I totally feel this sort of, you know, inverse like benefit to my fiction writing. And I think it really helps if you're just trying to plan like a new story or figure out, you know, how to fully flesh out a story. But also if you're just interested in writing like an actual film or TV series, that's what we're going to be doing basically, is like breaking it down that way. But anyways, just wanted to shout that out. Thank you for sharing the link.
Yes. I am so excited. Like literally after I'm done with this, I will be checking my calendar to double check that I can make the class, and then I'll be signing up for the class. I'm very excited.
So wonderful to hear. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Tiffany, both of you, for just, I can see all the, you know, the love that you put into this, and hearing you guys talk about the novel the way you did. It just really warms my heart and makes me really thankful that you connected with it and the characters.
Yay. Okay. Last question. Do you have any hope for, or do you have any last messages for your readers? Is the last question.
Oh, for my readers. Because for writers, that's an easy one. It's like, you know, because being a writer, I mean, I know so much of it is it's just exhausting, and it's really hard to keep going sometimes, you know. And so I say to all writers to just find the thing you want to say. If you have something you really want to say, you know, no one will stop you. Like, who knows how long it will take, but I think if you have that sort of fire in yourself, that you will be able to keep going. For readers of Disorientation, yeah, just thank you. I mean, I am always grateful when someone who's not, you know, like my relative or friend that I've have to force this book on or something. But when anyone who I don't know has read it, I mean, it sounds silly, but I'm always blown away. I'm just like, how'd you hear? but I just feel grateful that anyone is hanging out with these people that I made up in my head. And then, yeah, when I get to hear from you guys how you see them, and hear from people who are like imagining these lives for Ingrid afterwards, it's an honor. It's an honor that anyone, you know, sees them that way, and that your characters can kind of enter someone's life. Is just a huge privilege as an author.
Oh, so beautiful.
Well, it was truly a privilege to read your book. We were very, very excited about it. And honestly, like, we heard it through word of mouth too. So
really
spread out there. Yeah.
Honestly, I want to tell the story. So I knew I wanted to read Disorientation like before it came out, because like I heard about it and it sounded really interesting. But then one of my close friends, like we were in a bookstore together, and I was like, what has been like your favorite book of 2022 so far? And this is like already like towards the end of the year, and she said Disorientation. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I know you read a lot, and I know we have very similar tastes, so I am so excited to read this book. And so I pitched it for our book club, and here we are.
Oh,
She told
thank
me,
you.
and I was like,
oh my God.
yes, Taiwanese American author, yes.
That's really incredible to hear. And tell your friend thank you for me. Yeah, I think throughout this process, the publishing industry, they'll use their like data and so, try to figure out how to reach audiences. But truly what I've heard from just my anecdotal experience, it's been the Asian American community by and large, word of mouth. And I'm just like, that is wild, because that's something no one can control. No amount of like advertising or money can control that. Just what is conversation between, friends or acquaintances or whatever. So that I think that has meant so much to me. And I'm like, oh, of course it's my community. Of course it's like the ones who lift each other up. I had no doubt, but it's really heartwarming and special to me every time I hear a story like that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yes, of course.
And we will continue to spread the word. Thank you, everyone who joined and watched. We are very, very excited to have Elaine with us, and we hope we can read the short story collection soon. Otherwise, in May, we're going to be reading Squire for our book of the month. We'll announce more information on Instagram, and you can check out our website and Discord. But otherwise, we hope to see you next time.
Yay! Thank you.